This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. I have something exciting. A young man that is actually from right here in Northern California, Sacramento, my hometown, who got his start doing open mics in the Sacramento area and working at my club, but went on to fame and fortune doing comedy for almost 20 years. So I'm happy to have him on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Brian Diamond. Brian, wow, it's so great to connect after all these years. Thank you. That's enough of the audience. Great to have you back connected. We worked together back in the late 80s and early 90s, and then you went off and kind of had an adventure in comedy, and that ended up driving you to LA for some acting work. You really had a pretty interesting career, but we're going to get to that. But just first off, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. And you know what? And thank you for introducing me as a young man, because you may be the only one who thinks that.
Well, to me, everybody's young. No, but it's just great to, one of the reasons I do this podcast is it gets a chance to reconnect. But I'm extra excited because there's been some famous people that came out of my club that started there. Carlos Alazraqui, Karen Anderson, Brian Posehn, that really cut their teeth at Laughs Unlimited and are basically celebrities in at least in their own minds. You were one of those acts that started off as an open micer, and after a few years working at my clubs, went on to an actual career in show business, and I want to get to that. But let's give everybody a little bit of background. Brian Diamond, you had an interest in acting, but you started off in stand-up. What kind of gave you that nudge to get on stage the first time?
You know, I wanted to do it. There was just never a place to do it. You know, here in Sacramento, I mean, before the Sacramento Kings got here, we weren't even on the map. Nobody even knew where we were. And so there was no, if you wanted to do stand-up, you either had to go down, I guess, to San Francisco, I'm thinking. But I was only like 15. I didn't have a car yet. I was writing jokes and wanted to do it. There was never a place to do it.
So this was something that you actually touched on as a juvenile. I mean, as a teenager, you didn't wait until you were an adult and go, hey, geez, Rodney Dangerfield was 50 before he hit the stage for the first time. So this was something that you were actually thinking about before you were an adult.
Oh, I absolutely wanted to do nothing else. I wanted to be an actor and a comedian, and there was no plan B.
Oh, that's cool.
I used to, and I knew I was just different than the other kids watching. Like the kids would watch the Brady Bunch, and they would all be, Mr. and Mrs. Brady, and to me it was Florence Henderson and Robert Reed and Christopher Knight and. I knew all the actors' names, and when I watched Gilligan's Island, it was Jim Backus, and that was just, an 11-year-old doesn't do that. I would always look at camera angles, and so it was.
So you had some theatrical interest and some acting in mind, and how did the comedy work into it?
I blame the Three Stooges. I absolutely.
Well, they had an effect on a lot. I still have the bruises.
Yeah. I worked with a comedian one time. He had a great joke talking about how parents used to say they'll become violent if they watch the Three Stooges. They'll become murderers. He goes, you know what happened to me? Yeah, I became a comedian. That's what happened to me. I knew that when I started writing jokes, I was maybe like 14 or 15. But I didn't get an opportunity to do it until I was 20. Somebody here in Sacramento said, hey, there's an open mic here in town. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I found that the jokes that I wrote, when I was 14 or 15 are not funny for a group of strangers that are a lot older than 14 or 15. And, so that was like a rude awakening. And then also they were 5 or 6 years old at that point.
And I'm going to interject and just say there's such a big difference between being the class clown or the funniest one in the family to performing in front of strangers and getting to make them laugh. And I'm just guessing, Brian, but as a teenager, there was probably some, fart jokes or poop jokes or something, the kind of stuff that teenagers get a big laugh at, that if you went out and did it in front of a bunch of adults, may not really go over.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. They're juvenile, sophomoric jokes. The other thing too is the intimacy of, you and me and everybody, we know Mike. And so when I do an impression of Mike, whoever Mike is in your family or.
Right.
But this audience who's never met you, they don't know all these people. And so you have to find a common ground with them and pop culture and what's happening in the news. And so for me, I started out doing a lot of stuff, the commercials on TV, and that's
interesting. So where's the beef, and making fun of the old commercials back. Well, what's interesting is we're both homegrown Sacramentans, and I started my club in 1980, and we had an open mic almost immediately because I was taught that that's how you find and develop talent. You are younger than I, and you were, waiting for that opportunity, but it wasn't at Laughs. You were doing some open mics at some bars and bowling alleys or whatever before you came to my club. Mm-hmm. So at least you got your feet wet and kind of realized that maybe that sophomoric humor wasn't going to work. And that's when you started working on it. Because I remember that when you did eventually end up at my club, you actually did have some material. It obviously needed work and it needed development and you needed more time, which is totally common for an open micer, but it wasn't like your first time on stage.
No, I had probably been doing it about 3 years before I got into your club.
Oh, that long.
And I remember you had a bartender, I don't remember his name, but I went in and I was trying to get into your club and I said, yeah, I've performed it. And I just made up the names of these comedy clubs. I'm like 20 years old. Yeah, I've been to this one. And he's just looking at me like, yeah. I wasn't ready to come to the club, but I just so badly wanted to get on stage. And I did the comedy competition, and that's how if you place in the finals, you get work at Laughs Unlimited.
That was the rule.
Yeah, and I made it to the finals, and I got 2 weeks work there. And
so that's how I discovered you.
Correct.
See, because no offense to you, and just to make my audience a little more aware, I'm older now, and this was back when I was young, and I literally saw thousands of acts come through my door. So I don't remember personally how you came to work for me, and that's why it's one of the early questions in the podcast interview. But I think it's fascinating because the comedy competition, we called it the Great Northern California Comedy Competition. It really was. This was before the San Francisco competition. This was pretty early on. And it was a way for me to not only get people that were, let's call them wannabes, an opportunity to get on stage because there was no restrictions. You didn't have to have a certain amount of time. You didn't have to be clean. It was an open stage. If you wanted to try to juggle knives and kill yourself, hey, go for it, right? It was pretty open, the wild, wild west of entertainment. But it is true that the competition, the prizes were work at the club. And not just open mic work, but you could get a paid gig. Mm-hmm. And we had some great winners of that competition. But I think that's fascinating that's what introduced you to me as an entertainer.
Mm-hmm. You had some heavyweights that would come out and do those competitions, and they weren't, it was called the Great Northern California, but you had people coming from Houston, Texas, and, Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle. You had a lot of people coming from. Well,
when you put the prize is weeks of work at a chain of clubs, mm-hmm. Any entertainer that is worth his nut is looking for that work, looking for that paycheck. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't have any huge cash prizes. We just promised paid work. And in the comedy industry back in the 80s, that was a lot. Mm-hmm. It was. So it was a bit of a draw. So you did the competition. You were one of the top people. I saw you and offered you some work. Did you start off? I'm sure you started off as an opening act. Did you get a chance to develop? Did you work with any comics that kind of guided you?
Oh, absolutely. And not to sound like I'm being a name dropper, but, I worked with Jerry Seinfeld later on, but, Willie Tyler and Lester, John Fox, Tim Jones, and
all great comics, and I'm sure you learned stuff from them.
Absolutely.
I'm always telling comics, and in fact, the book I just came out with, it says, watch other comics, listen, learn, ask questions, because we're all in this industry, and there's things to be learned. I think you work with some amazing people.
Yeah, and I watched, and Paula Poundstone, watched, and they all had a little something different that I could learn from. That they had a different skill set. Jerry was a word technician. John Fox with all his physical animation, I loved all that. I mean, his body was an instrument. The way that he would tell a joke. Tim Jones was just very good at working the audience, and Paula Poundstone was just an amazing improviser.
And she was kind of out there. She could take some topic and just twist it, kind of like Emo Phillips. Take something that you and I would think is normal, and they would find the funny by looking at it through the Wonderland mirror or something. It's like instead of Alice in Wonderland, it was Paula. She was amazing at that. Well, I'm so glad that you had an opportunity to work with people like that. I think it's interesting. We shared this in a different interview, but you said you and I had a little conversation, and I sat you down and gave you what advice?
I remember it like it was yesterday. So you got to remember, at that time, I started doing stand-up when I was 20, and I'm maybe like 23 at this time, but still using jokes that I wrote, when I was 20. And that would kill in the bars, right? But this is a comedy club now. You're not in the bars anymore. And
we had brought you to the A room.
Yes, absolutely. And you're working with these. And so you pulled me aside and said, your material's a little bit crude. And
I'm so subtle.
Yeah. And I didn't understand that. But looking back now, and I remember some of the jokes that I was doing, I won't do them here. But, one of them was a big Pee Wee Herman impression. Pee Wee Herman, going out on a date and having relations in the
Pee Wee Herman having sex. Well,
yes,
that sounds perfect.
Yeah. Yes. And so, but that was what I closed my show with, and then, a couple of the commercials that were out there. And I remember, I can say it in a clean way. Do you remember the commercial for Head and Shoulder shampoo where the girl scratches her head and she says, and then the voiceover of the narrator says, "That itch could be telling you something." And I'd say, if that happened to me, I just think, I mean, just scratch your head going, "Hey, I wonder if I should go talk to this guy." And I said, but however, if she were to scratch herself, and I can't do it on a podcast, but scratching her genitalia, if you will, and I go, then I would say, now that itch could be telling you something. Funny when you're 21 or 22, not something that you wanted opening for.
Right, Jerry Seinfeld or somebody.
Yeah.
But it is true that there is a line of humor. We're taking something that everybody's aware of, like a TV commercial, the Where's the Beef commercial, and some of these others. Head and Shoulders is a good example. And that's not a horrible joke. It's just that it was crude compared to what I knew you could do and what the others that would have to follow you. And it's been mentioned a couple times in the podcast, but me as the producer, it's so important to set up the acts, the headliners, so that they shine, right? And so the opening act can't be funnier than the headliner, or the featured act can't be funnier than the headliner. You want to build the energy and build the excitement. That's what a producer's all about. It's directing the entertainment so that it brings the best possible show. They see the opening act and people go, "That was hilarious. How can they top that?" Oh, and then they see the feature and they go, "Oh, wow, and then they see the headliner. Well, boom, they're falling out of their chairs, right? You're building to a crescendo of comedy, entertainment, and laughter. And it's all about directing the show the right way. So I'm glad I was so honest.
Well, on behalf of every comedian, thank you. And on behalf of an audience member that don't know why they enjoyed the show, they just know that they had a good time, because a lot of that stuff's invisible. It's because of that. That's behind the scenes. And I can tell you that as I advanced through my career and I became, a headliner, I used to sit there and think, what are you thinking about putting these people in front of me? What do you know?
Oh, I've heard that before. I was talking to Steve Bruner, who we both know is a very successful, but also one of the cleanest stand-up comics ever around. And he will do some gig in Wichita or something, and they would put up some fart fest, freaking this, freaking that kind of act in front of him. And then say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've taken you to the toilet, and now here's Steve Bruner. And it just makes his job so much harder, and there's no reason to do that. It's unfair to the comic, and it's unfair to the audience, because you've taken them down one road, and you really want to end up on the clean road, because that's where you're going to get your success. And you're not going to become a Jerry Seinfeld or a Jay Leno by being dirty and spewing crap all the time. But bringing it back to the conversation, I always believed in trying to be honest with people, because that's how they grew. So if I took the time to sit you down and say, hey, this is a little crude, I think you can do better, it may have sounded a little harsh at the time, but it was meant to encourage you to keep writing and keep working at it. Because if I wasn't interested, and if I didn't see any spark of talent, I wouldn't have bothered. You just wouldn't have been back.
Right. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but as I got older and I look back, I said, no, he's right. I also had another person tell me, a guy named John Cantu. So some of your comedy buffs will know him.
I know John.
And he's like, how long have you been doing this? How much time you got? And I said, I got 20. He said, how long have you been doing it? I said, 3 years. He says, no, you got 5. I said, no, I got 20. You got 5. You can do 20. You got 5. And I was so offended. And then but as I got older and I look back, you and him were right.
John was giving you the straight poop that when a comic thinks they have so much time, they probably have half of that.
Yes.
And because every comic wants to exaggerate their ability because they're trying to show off for the producer of the show. But we as producers realize we don't want everything you have. We want the nuggets of gold at the base of it. Well, that's all interesting stuff. Now, you worked for me several years, and you worked way up to at least featuring. Any memories or stories about working with somebody on or off stage that you remember or have fond or bad memories of?
I would have to say I enjoyed hanging out with comedians. I didn't have any bad experiences. I always loved talking about the work. To me, this was an art and a craft. For some people, it was just about getting up and being funny. And I don't remember who told me this, but they said a line and says, you were talking about the difference between being funny in class or funny around your family. And somebody said, you know what the difference between a joker and a professional comedian? I said, what? And he said, a joker says funny things, but a professional comedian says things funny. And I went, ooh. And I went, and so there is, people
Very
don't
thoughtful.
realize, they don't realize there's very much a craft and a science to this. The art of it is to make it look like you're just up there talking and it's stream of conscious, and there was nobody better at it than Robin Williams. It just looked like he was up there. But I will tell you that for most comedians, it's the Rod Stewart line where he says, my ad-lib lines were well rehearsed.
Well, and Robin is a great example, but everybody thinks that he just made that stuff up on the spot. And what was great was that his mind was so quick that he could go into his mental file and come up with something funny about a word, a situation, whatever he was talking about. And he had just honed and trained such a large file of information that he, more than most, could call up jokes or funny information to share about any particular topic that came up on stage. But what I was going to bring it down to was it's so important that the comic is doing an art form and sharing and engaging with an audience. And you can't do that if you're not being real, if you're not, there's always some exaggeration and maybe some lies in it, but it's something that the audience has to relate to and understand. And the other part of the art form, and I've mentioned this previously, so excuse me, but what makes comics good actors And the thing is that when you're on stage doing a bit that you've done 1,000 times to get it honed, when you're doing it in front of that audience, they think that you just came up with it. That's the acting. It's like, oh, I got a funny joke to hear. Well, the audience doesn't realize you've told that joke, 5,000 times to get it perfect. And that's where the acting comes in.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you had a lot of interest in acting. And as part of your comedy career, you kind of took a step. You could have stayed on the road, but you decided to head down to Los Angeles and kind of tip your toe into the acting world, right?
Yeah, I all I ever wanted to do was be Paul Reiser or Michael Keaton. Those were those were my heroes, and even Kevin Pollak. I could throw in there. These were stand-up comedians that were serious actors, and I wanted to do that. So I was taking acting classes here in Sacramento. But yeah, I went to LA and because you have to. I mean, you eventually at some point you got to go to New York or LA, and obviously LA was the right here in California. And I went down there, but when I first got down there, I was still on the road. I was still living out of a suitcase, and I said, well, I'm not even available in town for auditions or classes or anything. So what am I going to have to make I'm going to have to come off the road and get a job.
And that's a huge decision. I mean, I know some comics that said, I can't do this. I got to keep on the road and make a living, and I'm going to do it doing stand-up comedy. And that became their career. But you and I both know dozens of people that said, well, I've done the road and now I want to get a career in acting, but they have to make that switch and dedicate themselves and their time to acting classes and doing showcases and being seen in the area where they hope to get hired.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's also hard too is being, working the clubs every night and maybe getting a couple TV shots along the way and traveling all the way to leave all that and then go get a quote unquote real job. I know that for me, I hadn't had a job in 8 years, and it was very, very difficult to go back. And in that time, computers had come along. I mean, computers obviously been around for a very long time, but they didn't really the internet didn't come around until 94 and Windows 95 came out in 94. By the time I went to go get a real job in 98, I didn't have any computer skills. I was out living out of a suitcase.
Oh, none of us did. Yeah.
And so what I did is what most actors do. I had to go wait tables. And so I got a job wait table. I was very fortunate that I got a job in a very, very high-end hotel in Beverly Hills, 5-star, 5-diamond hotel, and was around all the industry. All the industry people came in there all the time.
Good way to make connections.
Well, no, actually,
really?
No, and I'll tell you why. We had to sign a waiver that we couldn't disclose any information. You couldn't talk to them. You could talk to them, but
you can't pitch hey, I got a movie idea.
No, it's not only is it tacky, you could get fired for it.
Oh, wow. And I makes sense, though.
Yeah, and I didn't realize where I was working until I started seeing the clientele come through. And I mean, everybody was old Hollywood, new Hollywood, old singers, new singers, old money, new money, producers in the record business, producers in the film business. And it was interesting to be around all these heavyweights and talk to them and have conversations with them, even laugh with them. And yet I was no closer to making it than if I worked at a Denny's in South Dakota.
Yeah, that's kind of the reality of Hollywood, I think. But I think I'm interested as a listener, and I think my audience would be interested, that we always, my whole life in show business, that's why I call it on the fringe of show business, is here in Sacramento. Mm-hmm. And you might as well be in the middle of Wichita, Kansas, or something like that, because once you're out of Hollywood or out of New York, depending on your line, you're nobody in the Hollywood scene. Mm-hmm. And so I had to make my own reality of entertainment in my little pond of Sacramento. But going to LA, we've all heard these nightmare stories of people going down and sacrificing for years, taking acting classes, trying to be seen, doing auditions, and some get that golden ticket, and sometimes it pays off, but that's like 1 or 0.5% of the time. Absolutely. Most of them end up being lifetime bartenders or waiters.
That you were spot on. There's a couple of times in history that plays out, not just in show business, but right here, the gold rush. How many people came out here for the gold rush? Very, very, very few people actually made money, and many people went away more broke than they came here with. And it's the same thing with Hollywood and I was always a numbers guy, and I would look at the statistics and the odds and the probability of making it in the business, which is a terrible thing to do in Hollywood. But I couldn't help it. I was probably more geared to be a line producer but I still can pursue doing it because I loved comedy and I loved acting and it's very, very, very difficult to get into the Screen Actors Guild. Very difficult. But even if you do,
I'm going to interrupt. If you get to join the Screen Actors Guild, does that open any doors, or are you just paying dues?
Great question.
Because I don't know.
Answer, you're paying dues. It means absolutely nothing, and you think it's your big break. And I had somebody even tell me that. He goes, Brian, you think, because I finally did get my SAG card. And he goes, what, do you think that everything's going to open up for you now? He goes, no. He says, now you can't do non-union work. And he goes, and now and I had a friend of mine that actually got a pretty decent role in Hunt for Red October.
Okay.
And he thought, oh my gosh, this is my big break. And he says, and when that door opens for you, you find there's a brick wall on the other side.
Well, I can't tell you. We were joking the other day about how many actors, they work so hard. They do so many auditions and they take so many actor training classes, and they're 6 years in after waiting tables, and they get their break, and they're put on a sitcom, and they go out and they get that contract, and they go out and they buy a house or they buy the Maserati, and then 3 months later the show's canceled. And that income stops.
Right.
Or even if they run a year or two, then it stops. Then who are they?
Yeah.
They're so forgotten so quickly in Hollywood. It's always the next thing. It's not what you have done. It's what can I do to take advantage of your talent in the future?
Right.
It's a really difficult. It's so funny because to everybody else in the country, which is 99.9% of the country, Hollywood is glitz and glamour. But if you're in Hollywood, it's a cesspool of competition and people, ignoring you, and you're fighting up a stream of degradation to try to get any recognition. It's a hard path.
Yeah.
Now, I know you did an evening at the Improv. You've done some television. You got on one of the few white comics to get on the BET network. Mm-hmm. You've had some successes that way. But did those experiences open up the doors?
You think that when you're young and naive, you think that, but all those shows that not that I was on a lot. I had a handful. They come on late at night. I did the show Friday Night Videos on NBC. I don't know if you remember that, where they put a comedian on Friday. Well, it's at 12:30 in the morning. Who's watching that? I mean, and no, it really, I couldn't. Nobody. You bring up Bruce Smirnoff. Bruce Smirnoff had a great line one time we were working together talking about the business, and he says, anything you want to be in life, he says, I could chart a course for you. You want to be a lawyer? I could tell you. You could do this. You take this course. You take that. You go to law school. You pass the bar. You want to be an accountant, and whatever career he says, you want to make it in show business? There's no way to know. I mean, it's like winning the lottery. It's the right hair, the right look, the right, the right height. You literally can be too tall. You can be too short. You can be too fat. You can be too skinny. You can look too much like the other people that they have cast already, or not enough. I mean, I think the best story that I remember seeing, Christopher Knight, who played Peter Brady on the Brady Bunch. He said, "Look, I can't sing. I can't dance. I've never taken an acting class. I went to a cattle call, and they already had the dad cast already, Robert Reed. So they needed three boys that physically resembled Robert Reed. Christopher Knight walks in and he looks, you look like you could be Robert Reed's son.
And that's how he got the gig.
And that's how he got the gig. And he beat out people that have been honing their craft, these kids that probably been taking dance lessons since they were 3 years old, playing piano since they were 4. And that's the way
Hollywood breaks.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Bruce Smirnoff. We were talking about him before the show. He's a tremendous friend of mine and a very successful stand-up comic. He's done everything you'd want to do as a professional comic, TV, cruises, corporate, you name it. He's now retired in Southern Florida. But he's a great example, and I could name several, of somebody that was really good, really talented, really honed his craft as a stand-up comic, got some television shots, got some opportunities, but it just never broke to to what we call the golden ticket, where you get a sitcom or you get something that's going to change your life. I've had a chance to work with some of those people: Jerry Seinfeld, Dana Carvey, Jay Leno, Ray Romano, Ellen, but that's such a small percentage of the really talented people I got to work with over the decades. And that's kind of the exciting and at the same time sad part of the industry, that I could name so many people that are tremendously funny, and in some ways funnier than the people that made it. Mm-hmm. But those people got the golden ticket, that magic, lotto win, something happened, and now they're famous and multimillionaires. Great side example. And Brian, this interview is about you, but I want to share this. A very good friend of mine, I always say is one of the funniest people I ever got to work with, Larry Miller. Mm-hmm. He has done literally over 100 TV shows or movies. He's famous as the suck-up guy in Pretty Woman, and yet Larry Miller's not famous. Larry Miller had a great career, made plenty of money, very successful actor, very successful comedian. I'm sure has no regrets, and yet nobody knows him. And yet one of his best friends, somebody he shared the funniest men in the universe with, Jerry Seinfeld and Paul Reiser, Mark Schiff is the other one. Mm-hmm. And he saw his friends get that golden ticket and get their opportunities. And it's so fickle, this industry, because you never know. It's really not about talent sometimes. It's like you said, it's like, it's just fate. I don't know.
Oh, it's really like you go to Vegas and you hit the slot machine and you make it. Really is like that. It really is. And I don't want to bore your listeners with all these, but but there are a lot of people that are very, very talented that you've never heard of. And that's in the music industry. That's in the comedy, actors that will never make it above bartender or caterer, and that doesn't mean that they don't have the skills and abilities. It's just they didn't have the right hair color, they didn't have the right height. I mean, it really does we would surprise you how some people get cast on shows, and it does come down to, because you have to look at it as like you do with your comedy clubs. You say, okay, well, I'm working backwards. This is my headliner, so my feature's got to be this. My opener has to be this, and you're putting that. Well, it's the same way they put together movies and they put together sitcoms and whatnot, and you got to physically resemble. I can tell you what, it works against you and for you. You could be too pretty as a female, and the leading lady says, well, I don't want her up,
Right, I don't want to compete.
And you're like, but I killed at the audition. Yes, you did kill at the audition.
And you're very pretty.
You're very pretty.
You're
that's
done.
why you're not getting the job. You could be too tall, whether you're working with, there's a couple of household names that are not very tall. And if you're too tall and well, guess what? You didn't get, but I killed at the audition. Yes, you did, but you're too tall.
Yeah. We could go on and on about the ups and downs of Hollywood and acting. It's such a difficult path, but you took a shot at it and you had some opportunities. Let's bring it back to stand-up comedy. I know that you've worked stand-up comedy in all 50 states. Is that right?
Yes.
And so that
and
you've
I have
clubbed,
the scars to prove it.
and you've worked clubs from professional A rooms like mine to the bowling alley that has comedy in the corner, or the drunk strip club. Do you have any really strong positive?
Throw in a couple laundromats along the way.
Oh, laundromats. Yeah. Wow, there's a good one. I haven't heard that one. We're going to the comedy show down at the Five and Dime Laundromat. What about hell gigs? Have you had a hellacious road gig?
Oh gosh, more than you can get. I've played more hell gigs than I have A rooms like yours.
Well, there's more of them.
Yeah, it's feast and famine in this business. And you think just because you're doing stuff like you're on the Tonight Show or you're on Letterman, and obviously Letterman's retired, but my era was the 90s. I mean, I did it all the way up till about maybe 2007, 2008, and then sporadically throughout. But anyway, my era was the 90s. So, Letterman and Leno, those were the guy, Carson. These are people that would be on it. And then, a week later, they're just playing, some one-nighter out in the middle of Montana or Wyoming and whatnot. Like, what, you're just on the Tonight Show? Yes, I was. That's the reality.
That's the gig.
And
that's the life.
Yeah, I'd see great musicians out at these one-nighters. And I go, what are you doing out here? And they'd look at me and go, what are you doing out here? But, oh, yeah.
Any particular road story, though, that kind of stands out?
Oh, I got a couple of them. I would say, I'll preface this with, you and I had talked a little bit offline about all the factors. Well, Willie Tyler and Lester's had talked about all the things that can make a show successful, not successful.
Right. I'll shortly reiterate. So we were talking earlier before the interview that Willie Tyler and not Lester, but Willie Tyler of the Willie Tyler and Lester fame, and they've been interviewed on this podcast, had given you some advice saying that don't take each show to heart that you failed or won, because there's so many factors, including staging, lights, sound, day of the week, time of the show, audience, all those things are
what time
a factor.
of night you go on, who you follow.
Yeah. All that's a factor in being a successful stand-up set. That's a great thing to share, and Willie was nice to do that with you. And so how does that work into the story? What happened?
Well, one that comes to mind. I mean, the worst thing for comedy is daytime.
Oh, right.
And the second worst thing for comedy is, actually in reverse order, the worst thing is outdoors.
Oh.
Outdoors. Your club is intimate, low ceiling.
Right.
Everybody's sitting next to you. You're all tightly packed in there. It's a very intimate setting. So outdoors kills, daytime kills, and music. You do not want to follow music or be associated with music unless you're in Vegas. You're wearing a tuxedo. You're opening for Frank Sinatra, Anita Baker, Luther Vandross. Those were the great gigs. But you don't want to be opening for Tool, or Metallica or anything like that.
Yeah, because the audience is there for the music. They can care less about the crap comedian that's got to go up and kill 10 minutes. So that's funny.
So I have I can remember the toughest gigs like they were yesterday. The one gig I was playing, I did a week in Nebraska. Sorry, not trying to brag. But it was a whole bunch of one-nighters where you went from like North Platte, Kearney, I don't remember all these towns. And one of the gigs it's a strip club all day long. And then at 8 o'clock on Wednesday nights, or 8 o'clock on Thursday nights, they do a comedy show.
What's the audience there for?
No, you got to, they open at 12 noon and they're seeing naked ladies all day long. And then at 8 o'clock, the comedy show starts.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Diamond.
And I was opening at that. And those guys, they're not professional MCs like you. They didn't do 15, 20 minutes up front and get the audience warmed up and
get them focused,
no,
right?
It's like, y'all ready? All right, bring up,
Betty, you left your G-string here.
And I'm telling you, these people do not want to see stand-up comedy. No. And I hop up on stage, and like one of the first things I hear
I'm sorry to interrupt. Were you in front of or behind the pole? Sorry, that just came to mind.
No. Gosh, I don't remember. I just remember.
Oh, I was joking.
No, I know. I'm trying to remember the layout of the room. But in any event, they had no use for comedy, and me being the first person up on stage, they had no use for me. And I remember I was only up on stage just a couple of minutes, and I heard somebody yell out, "Hey! Show us your tits."
Did they really?
Yeah, and I did, and I made $20. Really? Yeah, I made $20.
Hey, Sparky, put some money in my pants. Else, you want to see it, you got to pay.
And they want me back, so everybody. No, that was.
That is so hard for comedy.
Oh gosh, it was like pulling teeth, and I had to do 30 minutes, and it seemed like 3 hours and 30 minutes just to get through it, and it was brutal.
That would be tough. You said there was one other.
Well,
As we revel in the tough things.
Oh, there's many. I would have to say I got two of them for you, but one of them was right here in Sacramento.
Oh.
Of all places, of all things, the work was in Sacramento. It was at the California State Fair.
Okay.
And it's in the daytime.
Okay.
And it is, there's a band out there that's playing. There's your daytime, outdoors.
With music.
Sacramento, August, 103 degrees.
Yeah, and the heat too makes a difference.
Oh, and so the band is playing, and then they say, "Hey, we're going to take a little break, and we're going to bring out a comedian." Boo, boo! He said, "I haven't even come up on stage yet.
Right,
and people
right.
are already like yelling and I'm throwing stuff at the stage and and that was just my parents. So and I went up on stage, and right before I go on, the guy that is booking me. He says, "Look, you don't have to go on. You don't have to go on." He goes, "I'll give you, $50, and you don't even have to go on at all." And I was getting $200 to do. Like I said, "No, I need the money." I said,
right.
give me that mic." It was the worst decision. I should have just taken the $50. I mean, people were throwing stuff and yelling, and I couldn't even. Comedy, about at least my style, because I'm from the old school, is premise, setup, punchline.
Right. No. You were doing it right. Yeah, but
you couldn't even get your premise and your setup. That was.
If you don't have the audience's attention, you weren't set up as a comic. You were trying to compete with the music. That is a hell gig guarantee. Now, what about like one of your best shows? Was there something that, not necessarily at Laughs Unlimited, but was there a concert or show? I know you did a couple evening, the Improvs, maybe one of those. Was there something that like you said, "Wow, this is why I'm in the business"?
Two shows that come to mind. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot. I mean, I can't, I mean, I'm just picking two, but certainly there were enough good shows to keep me going for doing it for almost 20 years. But I would say two come to mind. I won my first tour as a professional comedian. I did it for about 5 years before I felt ready to quit my job.
Okay.
And I quit my job. My first gig as a professional was going overseas on a USO tour.
Oh, those are cool.
Yeah, entertaining the troops that were getting ready for Operation Desert Storm.
Wow.
The Gulf War, the first one. And I went over there with Mo Betterman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Mo Betterman and I went over there. And
Mo Betterman, regular comic in Sacramento.
Yeah.
But what a great opportunity, and I could see why that would be memorable, getting a chance to entertain the troops. And unlike a state fair crowd, they were probably hungry for anything to take their mind off what was coming and to be entertained by comics. If you're in the military and you're about to go into war, it's like Bob Hope. I mean, you cannot bomb. They are so hungry for entertainment. I bet those were amazing gigs.
Yes, they were also that thing we talked about, that these aren't comedy clubs. And sometimes it was a makeshift, couple milk crates, put a plywood, portable PA system. These guys are getting ready to go to war. These aren't comedy clubs. Right. So some of those were tough, and they were during the daytime, and they were outdoors. But
but the crowds, wouldn't they have been a little more receiving or accepting of what the situation was, or it still made it tough because it was a lot of them, daytime?
A lot of us, when we were over in Korea, a lot of people, they were getting ready to go home. They put in their 2-year duty, and now we're getting ready to go to war, and they've been notified, you're staying here with no end date and indefinitely. So a lot of them were very depressed. A lot of them they didn't want. So there was those shows, but this particular one, we were out in the desert, Kuwait actually, and it was a makeshift, and all these military guys in their fatigues. And there's not a lot of shows where people are standing there with M16s. But this particular show...
down at Joe's Bar, but that's open mic night. Those would be different.
Yeah, and we had 5 comedians, and I went up last and did the show, and they all got up, and I thought they were all getting up to leave because I was the last comedian. The show was over. And they got up to give a standing ovation, and... It was just like, oh man, it was, I got verklempt, because this is why we're out here. This is what you said, why we're bringing, these people are going into war, these troops, and this is what they needed. Just a little bit of home, a little bit of laughter. And we delivered, all 5 of us, we delivered.
Yeah, but the emotions that you must have felt at that moment in knowing what gift you had given those soldiers, we talk about the endorphins and the good feelings and the energy that an audience can give an entertainer. but that situation has to be one of the most satisfying because they know and you know that their future is undetermined, and you're giving them, like you said, a little touch of home. That had to be amazing.
Yeah, it really was. And I mean, you talked about Mark Schiff a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Mark Schiff wrote a book. I read his book, and he talks about a similar thing going overseas. And I actually, you know, I got teary eyed reading his book because I said, yeah, I did that. And that was probably one of the best, you know, times in my career. I know
that's great that you did that, Brian.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that just like any other career choice, and it doesn't matter if you're building a building or digging a ditch or whatever career choice you make, there's going to be hell gigs, days that you want to forget or go home and have a pint. And there's going to be days that you go, you know, I did something I feel good about. I succeeded at something. I completed something, whatever it is. And you get that sense of satisfaction. And in show business, I think the lows might be a little lower and the highs might be a little higher. It's all part of show business, but I think those are great stories. Thanks for sharing them.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, and another one that's same like that would share. Did a show. Two ladies came up to me afterwards, and they said, "We wanted to thank you," and I said, "For what?" And they said, "Well, our brother died 3 months ago. This is the first time that we got our mother out of the house. She's just been, you know, in a bad way for 3, and you made her laugh, and we wanted to thank you." And it was like, that's a great moment. And that was your special moment, but I want to pull off that a little bit and share with my audience that what's interesting about being a comedian or a comedy producer like me, as a club owner, I would sit back during the show and see everybody laughing. And guess what? The people I pick out were the ones that weren't laughing. And I would watch them until they broke. And you go, yes, you know, we made a difference in this person's life, at least for this time that they were there. And that in itself is satisfying. And I wasn't even a part of it. I just put together the show, but I got satisfaction out of seeing that for the time that people, it was kind of a weird goal, but the time that people are in my clubs, they're not thinking about their bills or some fight with a relative or having to go to work or whatever. It's true escapism. If an audience is enjoying the show and the comic is doing what he's supposed to do and bringing them in and then entertaining them with stuff they can relate to, they don't even have a chance to think about all the rest of the world. They're really in that moment, you know, and we talked about that earlier, being in the moment and how important that is as an entertainer. But in stand-up comedy, it actually rackets up to another level, and having those two ladies share that with you, much like entertaining the troops, had to really feel satisfying and fulfilling as an entertainer. Congratulations. Thank you.
Those kinds of moments are rare and need to be remembered.
Well, thank you. And I should thank them because, you know, and you pointed out best I think you put this in your book, or you must have told me, but I remember you saying something that exactly that the best times of your life are in this industry and the lowest points in your life are in this industry. And that was certainly the way that I felt over a lot of times. I mean, you can get your heart broken in Hollywood and in this business, and because of all those things. And so those moments, you know, their victories are
cherished.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I love that I can even share that story, but I remember them. I have total recall still.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been such a gift to have Brian jump in and be interviewed for my podcast. We had not known each other very long back in the 90s and 80s, and we have not been connected over the last several decades. So you taking the time to share your story with myself and my podcast listeners, thank you very much. It's been a privilege to get reconnected.
I absolutely agree. It's great to reconnect with you, and it's just great. It really is. And thank you so much for having me on and being able to share these stories and tell. It's been a lot of fun. Thank
And
you for
before
having me.
we end, I know you just finished a book. It'll be out soon. Is there a title?
Yes, the name of the book is called "If You Don't Know Where You're Going, You've Come to the Right Place."
Well, ladies and gentlemen, check Amazon. By the time this launches, the book will be out, and it's by Brian Diamond. That's your author, and the name of the book is?
If you don't know where you're going, you've come to the right place.
That's great. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today, Brian, and keep an eye out. He's still out doing his one-man show occasionally, still entertaining, but more importantly, look for the book.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Oh, our pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to the podcast. Don't forget, next Sunday, another great show for you. Thanks for listening. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.